Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to completely demystify the U.S. progressive tax system and decisively bust a pervasive financial myth that might literally be costing people money. Seriously, let's look at our paychecks in a completely new light. Here's our roadmap for today. We're covering what is a progressive tax, the tax bracket staircase, calculating your tax bill, marginal versus effective rates, and finally, busting the bracket myth. Knowing exactly what we're tackling is going to make these tax formulas completely stress-free. Section 1. What is a progressive tax? Let's dive right into the core foundation of how this all works. By definition, a progressive tax is a system where folks with higher incomes pay a higher percentage of their income in taxes, and this is done through brackets. The absolute keyword here is rate, meaning as your income goes up, only the higher earners pay a larger percentage of their income to federal taxes. But wait, does that mean a higher earner pays a massive percentage on absolutely everything they make? Well, that assumption is exactly where people get tripped up. Section 2, the tax bracket staircase. To really clear up that confusion, we need to look at how these rates are actually applied in reality. So what exactly is a tax bracket anyway? Well, it's simply a range of income levels where a specific tax rate applies. And here is the absolute most important takeaway you can get from this. Only the income that falls within that specific range is taxed at that rate. This is where so many people get confused. They assume that landing in a new bracket suddenly changes the tax rate on their entire annual salary. Let's look at the actual numbers for a single filer in 2024 to make this super concrete. What's really interesting here is how the brackets naturally form steps as your income climbs. You start out at a 10% rate for income up to $11,600. Then you move up to a 12% rate up to $47,150, and that continues all the way up to a 37% rate for income over $609,351. Now, while these specific dollar amounts change annually, the underlying structure of how they work, that's completely permanent. Let's think of these brackets using a staircase analogy. It's like a giant puzzle where each step has its own specific rate. When your income climbs higher and you move up to a new step, you do not go back and re-tax the steps below. So the absolutely crucial point here is that each dollar is only taxed once, at the rate for the step it lands on. It's a blueprint for your income, not some kind of retroactive penalty. Your earlier dollars are safely locked in at those lower rates. Section 3, calculating your tax bill. Let's actually prove how simple this staircase is by walking through the real-world math for a $30,000 income and then a $50,000 income. Imagine pouring a $30,000 salary right onto our staircase. First, we fill up that 10% step. 10% of that first $11,600 is exactly $1,160. Then, only the remaining $18,400 of your salary spills over onto the next step, which is the 12% bracket. 12% of that remaining amount is $2,208. Add those two together, and your total tax bill is $3,368. Notice that absolutely none of your income is taxed at 22% simply because none of your dollars reach that third step. And here's the resulting effective tax rate, 11.2%. Even though your highest dollars hit the 12% bracket, your actual effective tax rate is only 11.2%. Why? Because that first chunk of your money was safely taxed at a lower rate. You're paying 11.2% of your total income to the federal government, definitely not a flat 12%. Now, watch what happens at an income of $50,000. We fill up the 10% step completely. Then, we totally fill the 12% step, which maxes out at $35,550 of your income, adding $4,266 to the tax bill. Finally, only a tiny fraction of your earnings, just $2,850, steps onto the 22% tier, adding a mere $627. Adding all those up gives us a total tax of $6,053. And this brilliantly illustrates the math. Despite touching that seemingly intimidating 22% bracket, your actual effective tax rate is just 12.1%. You see, you only paid 22% on that final $2,850. The vast majority of your money was completely protected at the 10 and 12% rates. Section 4, marginal versus effective rates. Let's clear up the two absolute most confusing jargon terms in all of personal finance. These two terms get thrown around constantly on the financial news, but the difference is actually incredibly straightforward. Your marginal rate is just the highest step your income reached. Basically, it's the rate applied to your very last dollar. But your effective rate? That's the actual percentage of your total income paid in taxes. Think of it as the blended average of all the steps combined. Here's the simple formula for finding that true percentage. Total tax paid divided by gross income, multiplied by 100. Because of how the staircase works, your effective rate is almost always significantly lower than your marginal rate. Honestly, understanding this difference is exactly what separates financial literacy from financial anxiety. Section 5. Busting the bracket myth. Now that you're armed with actual tax system literacy, we can confidently address a really widespread anxiety regarding take-home pay. It all boils down to this one question. Will moving into a higher bracket lower your take-home pay? I mean, you've probably heard a coworker or a friend say they don't want to raise, or they refuse to work overtime because it's going to put them in a higher tax bracket and somehow completely ruin their paycheck. Let's look at the myth versus the fact here. The myth is that earning more can result in taking home less money overall. The fact? Derived directly from the source material we've been examining, it is mathematically impossible in the U.S. progressive tax system. Let's be crystal clear. Only the income within the higher bracket is taxed at the higher rate. Your income below that bracket is taxed exactly the same as it was before. Let's break it down to a tiny scale just to show you how foolproof this really is. Let's say you get a raise of $100 that pushes you into the next bracket. That means only those $100 are taxed at the new rate. If a bonus pushes you up a step, your previous earnings are entirely safe. Only the new money experiences the new rate. The whole rest of your paycheck remains completely untouched by that higher percentage. There's a fantastic takeaway from our source material that's incredibly important to remember. It says, you will always take home more after a raise. Always. If someone tells you otherwise, they do not understand how tax brackets work. Now you do. So, never fear a raise again, folks. The structure of the progressive staircase literally guarantees you will always keep the majority of your new earnings. Knowing that earning more always means taking home more, how are you going to negotiate your next raise? That wraps up our explainer. Take this knowledge, confidently step up that income staircase, and never let financial jargon or widespread myths hold you back from maximizing your potential.